They say a man can go 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water. But how long can a man go without sleep? I learned the answer in a place where darkness offered no mercy, where night became a weapon, where the simple act of closing your eyes turned into a luxury we couldn't afford. Some men counted days by scratching marks on bamboo, others whispered names of people they'd left behind. I counted the hours since I'd last truly slept. After a while I stopped counting. The numbers stopped making sense. This is the story of Changi, of Hellfire Pass, of the camps where we built their railway, where we died in shifts, where sleep became something we remembered like a half-forgotten dream, where men walked in darkness with their eyes open and their minds somewhere else entirely. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what I saw, what we survived, what it cost us. The Japanese called their railway project a marvel of engineering. We called it the Death Railway, but the railway itself didn't kill most of us. It was the exhaustion, the endless, grinding, soul-crushing exhaustion that turned men into ghosts long before their hearts stopped beating. I was there when Thompson scratched his 2000th mark into the bamboo post beside his sleeping platform. I was there when he stopped scratching, when he stopped counting, when he just stared at nothing with eyes that saw things the rest of us couldn't see yet. I was there when sleep became the enemy. We fought harder than the guards, harder than the disease, harder than the hunger that made our ribs show through our skin like xylophone keys. Let me tell you about the camp where no one slept. Let me tell you what happens when darkness forgets its purpose. We arrived at Changi in February of 1942. Singapore had fallen. We'd surrendered our weapons, our dignity, our freedom. The British officers told us to keep our chins up, said this would be temporary, said we'd be treated according to the Geneva Convention. They were wrong about all of it. The first night, I thought I'd sleep like the dead. We'd been marching for days. My feet were blistered raw. My uniform stuck to my back with dried sweat and fresh blood from where a guard's rifle butt had caught me across the shoulders. I was so tired my bones ached, so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. The barracks were open-sided bamboo structures, long platforms raised about 2 feet off the ground. Each man got exactly 2 feet of space, not 2 feet to himself, 2 feet of platform that you shared with the mosquitoes and the rats and whatever else crawled up from the mud below. I lay down that first night between Stevens and Morrison. Stevens was from Perth, talked about his wife constantly, had a daughter he'd never met. Morrison never talked about anything, just stared at the ceiling with eyes that had already started to go somewhere else. The jungle sounds started as soon as the sun went down. Screaming monkeys, birds that sounded like women being murdered, insects the size of my thumb that buzzed past our heads like tiny bombers, and underneath it all, the constant shuffle of feet, the moaning of sick men, the wet cough of cholera patients dying in the dark. I closed my eyes. I waited for sleep. It didn't come, not because I wasn't tired, God knows I was tired, but because every time I started to drift, something pulled me back. A rat running across the platform, a guard shouting in the distance. The man next to me is thrashing with fever dreams, the mosquitoes whining in my ear, the heat pressing down like a wool blanket soaked in bath water. I lay there for hours, eyes closed, body screaming for rest, mind racing with thoughts of home, of how we'd ended up here, of what tomorrow might bring. When the guards finally came at dawn, banging their rifle butts against the posts, screaming at us in Japanese we didn't understand, I hadn't slept at all. Neither had Stevens, neither had Morrison, neither had any of the 40 men in our barracks. That's when I realized this wasn't going to be temporary, and that was just the first night. They started the railway work in June. Up until then, we'd been doing odd jobs around the camp, building fences, digging latrines, carrying supplies. The work was hard, but it was bearable. 10, maybe 12 hours a day. Brutal in the heat, but we could manage it. Then came Speedo. That's what the guards called it. Speedo. Speed up, move faster, work harder. The railway had to be finished. The schedule was everything. Our lives were nothing. The shifts went from 12 hours to 15, then 18. Then they stopped being shifts at all. I remember the night they marched us to Hellfire Pass. We'd been working since dawn. Digging, hauling rocks, swinging pickaxes against stone that didn't want to break. My hands were bleeding. Morrison had collapsed twice. Stevens kept muttering about his daughter, about missing her birthday, about how she'd be walking by now. The sun went down. We kept working. They brought in oil lamps, bamboo torches. The light flickered against the rock face we were cutting through, throwing shadows that danced like demons. The heat from the fires mixed with the jungle heat made the air so thick you could barely breathe. I swung the pickaxe again and again and again. My arms stopped feeling like arms. They became machines, automatic. Swing, strike, lift, swing, strike, lift. Somewhere around midnight, I realized I was asleep. My eyes were open. I was still swinging the pickaxe, but I was asleep, dreaming about my mother's kitchen, about Sunday dinners, about sleeping in my own bed with clean sheets and a pillow that didn't crawl with bugs. Then a guard hit me across the back with a bamboo pole, and I was awake again, wide awake, pain screaming through my kidneys. The guard was yelling. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the meaning. Faster, work faster. I looked around at the other men. They were all doing it, all swinging tools with their eyes half closed, with their minds somewhere else. Walking dead men, working dead men, men who'd stopped sleeping and started something else instead. Thompson was beside me, swinging a sledgehammer against a spike. He was counting under his breath. 4,612, 4,613, 4,614. I asked him what he was counting. He looked at me with eyes that didn't quite focus. Swings, he said. Gotta count something. If I stop counting, I'll stop thinking. If I stop thinking, I'll stop being me. The sun came up. We kept working. They gave us 15 minutes to eat, rice and water, nothing else. Then back to the cutting, back to the rock, back to the endless swinging and hauling and dying. I don't remember when we finally stopped that shift. Don't remember walking back to the barracks. Don't remember lying down. I just remember waking up, if you could call it waking up, to the guards screaming at us again. Time to work, time to march, time to swing the pickaxe. I'd been asleep for maybe 2 hours, maybe. Stevens was the first in our barracks to get them. He'd been getting thinner. We all were, but Stevens seemed to be melting away faster than the rest of us. His skin hung off his bones like a badly fitted suit. His eyes had sunk so deep in his skull they looked like they were trying to hide. One night, maybe 3 months after we'd arrived, maybe 4, time had stopped making sense. Stevens started moving, not walking, not standing, just moving, his feet twitching, his legs shifted, like he was trying to shake something off. "You all right, mate?" I asked. He looked at me. The moonlight coming through the barracks showed tears running down his face. "They're crawling," he whispered. "My feet, they're crawling. Can't stop them, can't make them stop." Happy feet, they called it. The doctors, the prisoner doctors who had no medicine, no equipment, nothing but their training and their bare hands, said it was the nerves dying. Vitamin deficiency, beriberi, the body is eating itself from the inside out. But what it meant was simple. You couldn't sleep because the sensation was unbearable, like ants under your skin, like your feet were on fire and frozen at the same time, like something was crawling up your legs, into your spine, into your brain. Stevens walked that night, paced back and forth between the barracks, up and down, couldn't stop moving because stopping meant feeling it worse. By the next week, a dozen men in our barracks had it. By the month after that, it was half of us. I got it in my 3rd month. Woke up. If I'd been sleeping, I couldn't tell anymore. To the sensation of beetles crawling under my toenails, I shot upright, slapped at my feet, scratched them raw. Nothing helped, so I walked, joined the others, the nighttime wanderers, the men who couldn't stay still. We walked in circles around the camp, past the guards who'd stopped caring, past the sick who were too weak to walk, past the dying who'd stopped moving altogether. We walked and walked and walked, and we whispered, names mostly, names of people we'd left behind, wives, mothers, children, friends who'd died in the fighting, friends who'd died here. Morrison whispered his brother's name over and over, Patrick, 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 like a prayer, like an incantation, like, if he said it enough times, his brother might somehow hear it across the ocean, across the war, across the impossible distance between life and death. Thompson stopped counting swings, started counting names, everyone he'd ever known, starting with his family and working outward, teachers, neighbors, friends from school. The butcher went back home. The woman who ran the post office. "Got to remember them," he said. "If I remember them, I'm still me. If I forget them, I'm nothing." Stevens just said his daughter's name. Elizabeth, Elizabeth, Elizabeth. He never met her, never held her, never saw her face except in a photograph his wife had sent him before we shipped out. But he said her name 10,000 times. I said my brother's name, Charlie. He'd died at Dunkirk, never made it home, never got to see what I'd become. Maybe that was a blessing. The Bataan boys told us about it when they arrived at Changi. They'd been transferred from the Philippines camps, had done the death march, had survived things we couldn't imagine, which was saying something because we'd already seen things that would have broken us a year ago. They told us about walking in their sleep. At first, I thought they were being poetic, metaphorical, but they weren't. They meant it literally. On the march from Mariveles to San Fernando, 65 miles through heat that topped 100 degrees, with no food, no water, no rest stops, men had walked unconscious. One of them, a kid named Jackson from Iowa, described it. The march never stopped, but we discovered we could sleep. 2 guys on the outside would lock arms with 2 guys in the middle. The middle guys would close their eyes and just go, unconscious, walking dead. Then when the guards weren't looking, we'd switch. The outside guys would move to the middle and get their turn. How long? I asked. How long could you sleep like that? Maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15, just enough to keep you from dying. I thought about that. Thought about men so exhausted that their brains simply shut down while their legs kept moving. Thought about the trust required, knowing that if your friends dropped you, you'd hit the ground, and hitting the ground meant a bayonet. But I understood it because by month 6, I was doing it too. During the endless speedo shifts, during the times when we'd worked 62 hours straight with only brief breaks to choke down rice and water, I learned to sleep standing up. I learned to sleep while swinging a pickaxe. I learned to sleep while walking from the work site back to camp. My body kept moving. My mind went somewhere else. I'd dream about home, about my mother's garden, about the smell of bread baking, about rain on window panes, and the sound of wind through oak trees and all the small, beautiful things I'd taken for granted. Then a guard would hit me, or I'd stumble, or Morrison would grab my arm to keep me from walking off the path, and I'd be awake again, awake in hell, awake in a place where sleep was something that happened to other people in other lives. The psychological studies they did after the war said that combat soldiers broke down after 200 days of continuous stress, started showing signs of what they'd later call PTSD, started losing their grip on reality. We lasted longer than that. Not because we were stronger, but because we didn't have a choice. The breaking came anyway. Morrison was first. One morning, maybe 10 months in, maybe a year, I'd lost track. Morrison didn't respond when the guards came. Just lay there on the platform, staring at the ceiling. They beat him. Rifle butts, bamboo poles, boots. He didn't react. They dragged him to the sick barracks. The doctors looked at him, felt his pulse, checked his eyes. He's still alive, one of them said, but he's not here anymore. Morrison had gone somewhere else, somewhere inside his head where the guards couldn't reach him, somewhere where sleep was possible, or at least where consciousness wasn't required. He died 3 days later, not from wounds, not from disease, from exhaustion. His heart just stopped. Thompson went a different way. He'd been counting everything: names, swings, steps, the boards in the barracks ceiling, the seconds between guard rotations, everything. Then one night, he stopped. I found him sitting by the big tree, the massive buttressed tree at the edge of the camp where the sick men went when they couldn't sleep, when their happy feet drove them mad, when they needed somewhere to sit and talk through the endless dark. Thompson was just sitting, not counting, not whispering, not moving. "You all right?" I asked. He looked at me, smiled. It was the first time I'd seen him smile in months. "I figured it out," he said. "Figured out? It doesn't matter. The counting, the names, none of it matters. We're already dead. This is hell. We died and went to hell. And this is it, forever." I tried to tell him he was wrong, tried to tell him we'd survive this, we'd get out, we'd go home, but I couldn't make the words sound convincing, because part of me wondered if he was right. They found Thompson hanging from the big tree 2 days later. He'd used the bootlaces he'd somehow kept hidden, waited until the middle of the night when the guards were asleep, climbed up into those buttressed roots, and did what he needed to do. The guards cut him down, threw his body in the mass grave behind the camp, told us this was what happened to cowards. But Thompson wasn't a coward. He'd just run out of ways to stay human. But most of us didn't break. Not completely. We found ways, small ways, ridiculous ways, ways that would sound insane to anyone who hadn't been there. We talked about food. God, we talked about food for hours, days, weeks. Stevens, before the happy feet took him too far gone, organized what he called recipe lectures. We'd gather around him in the evening, those of us who could still sit still for a few minutes, and he'd describe meals, not just any meals, elaborate, detailed, impossible meals. "Start with the Yorkshire pudding," he'd say. "You've got to get the oven hot first, really hot, then the batter, eggs, flour, milk, just a pinch of salt. You pour it in the pan where you've heated the beef drippings, and you watch it rise, watch it go golden, crispy on the outside, soft in the middle." We'd sit there, starving, our stomachs eating themselves, listening to Stevens describe roast beef and potatoes and gravy and peas and carrots and pie for dessert. It sounds like torture, but it kept us human, because humans talk about food, humans remember meals, humans plan for futures where they'll eat again. Others wrote, not on paper, we didn't have paper, but in their minds. Jackson, the Bataan kid, composed letters to his mother every night, memorized them word for word. I planned to write them all down if we ever got out. "Dear Mom," he'd whisper, "I'm still alive. I'm still thinking about you. I'm still your son." Some of us set goals. One of the Australian boys, a kid named Davies, who couldn't have been more than 19, invented a game. He'd pick something in the distance, a tree, a post, a guard tower, and say, "I have to make it to that tree. That's my goal, just the tree." Then when he made it to the tree, he'd pick something else. "Now the post. Just make it to the post," breaking the impossible into pieces small enough to survive. I counted hours, not days, not weeks, not months, hours. How many hours since I'd last felt human? How many hours since I'd last slept properly? How many hours since I'd last thought I might survive this? The numbers got very large, but counting them gave me something to do, something to hold on to, something that proved I was still me, still thinking, still conscious in a place designed to strip consciousness away. We also took care of each other. This was the most important thing, the thing that separated the survivors from the dead. When Stevens got too weak to walk, Morrison and I carried him. When Morrison went silent, Stevens and I made him eat. When I got dysentery so bad I couldn't leave the platform, they brought me water, cleaned up after me, and whispered encouragement in the dark. The Japanese organized us into 10-man squads. If one escaped, they'd execute the other 9. This was supposed to turn us against each other, make us guards for our own prisoners. It did the opposite. It made us brothers. Because we knew that if one of us fell, the others fell with him. We knew that our survival was collective. We knew that the only weapon we had against the guards, against exhaustion, against the impossible mathematics of staying alive, was each other. The fit looked after the sick. The sick tried to stay strong enough not to drag the fit down. We divided food equally, even when rations were cut for those who couldn't work, even when it meant less for ourselves. We took turns sleeping, those who could still sleep anyway, watching over the sleepers, keeping the rats off, swatting the mosquitoes, whispering warnings when guards came close. We became something the Japanese didn't expect. We became a unit, not a military unit. We'd stopped being soldiers months ago. We became a survival unit. A brotherhood of the exhausted, a family of the sleepless. And that's what saved us. Not the food, not the medicine, not the hope of rescue, each other. There was a tree at the edge of the camp, massive thing, must have been 200 years old, maybe older. Its roots spread out in huge buttresses that created natural alcoves where men could sit. We called it the Big Tree. It became our gathering place, our cathedral, our confessional. When the happy feet got so bad you couldn't stay still, when insomnia drove you to the edge of madness, when you needed to hear another human voice in the darkness, you went to the Big Tree. I spent more nights there than I can count. Always the same faces, the walking wounded, sleepless, the broken who refused to stay broken. We didn't talk about the war, didn't talk about the guards, didn't talk about the work or the beatings or the friends we'd buried. We talked about it after, what we'd do when we got out, where we'd go, who we'd see, what we'd eat, what we'd say. Stevens talked about holding Elizabeth, meeting his daughter for the first time, watching her grow up. Jackson talked about his mother's kitchen, sitting at the table while she cooked, just sitting, just being home. Morrison, before he broke, talked about fishing, a river near his house in Queensland, sitting on the bank with a line in the water, and absolutely nothing to do but wait. Davies talked about sleeping. Not sleeping here, but sleeping in a real bed with clean sheets and a pillow and silence and darkness that meant rest instead of torment. I talked about rain, just rain, standing in it, letting it wash over me, letting it cool my skin and clean the mud and blood and fear away. Simple things, impossible things, things that kept us human. One night, this must have been near the end, maybe month 15, maybe 16. There were a dozen of us at the Big Tree. All of us are too wired to sleep. All of us are too broken to care. Someone started singing, quietly, barely audible, a hymn, something about grace and salvation, and being found. One by one we joined in, a dozen voices, barely more than whispers, men who hadn't slept in days, men who'd forgotten what it meant to be clean, to be fed, to be safe, singing in the dark. The guards didn't come. Maybe they heard us and didn't care. Maybe they were asleep themselves. Maybe even they needed some reminder that we were human. We sang every song we could remember. Church songs, drinking songs, songs our mothers taught us, songs we'd learned in basic training. We sang until the sun came up, until the guards started shouting, until it was time to work again. But for those few hours, sitting under that tree, singing in voices broken by screaming and starvation and despair, we were more than prisoners. We were men. We were brothers. We were proof that exhaustion could break the body but couldn't quite kill the soul. Not yet. Not if we didn't let it. Liberation came in August of 1945. The guards disappeared one night. Just left. Abandoned the camp. Abandoned us. We didn't know why. Didn't know the war was over. Didn't know that 2 cities had been turned to ash. Didn't know that Japan had surrendered. We just knew the guards were gone. For 3 days, we waited, expecting them to come back, expecting a trick, expecting bullets. Then the planes came, Allied planes, American, Australian, British. They dropped supplies, food, medicine, notes telling us to stay put. That help was coming. I remember watching the parachutes drift down. Remember thinking it was another dream, another sleep-deprived hallucination. But Stevens saw them too, and Jackson, and Davies. We all saw them. We were saved. Of the 60 men who'd been in my barracks that first night at Changi, 11 of us walked out. 11. The other 49 had died. Disease, exhaustion, starvation, beatings, suicide. Morrison was one of the 49. Thompson was one of the 49. Stevens, he'd made it. Made it through the happy feet. Made it through starvation. Made it through the endless work and the beatings and the madness. He made it 3 weeks after liberation. His body just gave up. Too much damage. Too many months of running on nothing. Too many nights without sleep. He died in a field hospital in Singapore. Died holding a letter from his wife. Died having never met Elizabeth. But he died knowing he'd survived. Died knowing he'd made it through hell. Died knowing his daughter would know he'd tried. I was there. I remember it. The sound of pickaxes striking stone in the dark. The silence of men too exhausted to scream. The smell of sweat and sickness and fear. War doesn't end when the shooting stops. It doesn't end when the guards leave. It doesn't end when you go home. I went home in October of 1945. I walked into my mother's kitchen, sat at the table, she made me tea. I couldn't drink it because my hands were shaking, because every sound made me flinch, because when I closed my eyes I saw Stevens walking with his happy feet. I saw Morrison staring at nothing. I saw Thompson hanging from the big tree. I see them still, 50 years later. 60 years later, until the day I die, I'll see them. The wounds weren't on the surface, couldn't be detected by a stethoscope, couldn't be treated with medicine. They were deeper, permanent, carved into my soul, in a place where sleep was impossible and darkness offered no mercy. I learned something in those camps, something about what humans can survive, something about what survival costs. We can go longer without sleep than anyone thought possible. We can keep moving when our bodies stop. We can work when we're unconscious. We can walk when we're dreaming, but we pay for it. We pay with our sanity, our peace, our ability to ever truly rest again. I'm 90 years old now, haven't slept through a night since 1942. Don't suppose I ever will, but I survived. We survived. And someone needed to remember. Someone needed to tell you what happened in that camp where no one slept. Someone needed to whisper those names one more time. Stevens, Morrison, Thompson, Davies, Jackson, all of them, all of us. War doesn't end. It only fades until someone else finds it again. Until then, I'll keep telling you what I saw when the dark returns, when the war returns, after dark.